Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second episode of Three Mystics at a Round Table. And I'm happy to have Gary and Sally with us again, Gary Langley and Sally Taylor of the Soul Explorers podcast. So if you haven't signed up for their podcast, go ahead and do that. How do you get to you? I know you're on YouTube, but do you have another website?
We don't have a website per se. We are on audio podcast servers as well, though. So any of those that you follow, we're on generally the major ones. So you can find us if you're just looking for the audio version as well. But YouTube, type in Soul Explorers Podcast. We should be the first thing to pop up.
Okay, great. And I know you've explored with a lot of other people and their journeys. And is the focus mainly on afterlife, or are there other subjects that you explore?
Other
We,
subjects, it's diversified somewhat.
yes.
Great.
We have mediums, we have medical professionals like Dr. Melvin Morris, we have out-of-body experiencers,
Mhm.
which is a subject we're going to talk about today. So,
Yeah. So if you haven't tuned into our very first episode of Three Mystics at a Round Table, it was on the afterlife, and the subject of out of body experiences came up. So we decided that our next episode would be on that subject, which personally, I think that it's part of the spiritual awakening process. Now, I don't know if you guys think that, but I know for Gary, that's what happened with you in your spiritual awakening. So I'm kind of excited to explore with both of you. And maybe, Sally, you could start out first. What was your very first out of body experience? And were you wanting to have an out of body experience?
I was wanting to have an out of body experience as I began my spiritual exploration, really still on my own at that stage. It was one of the things that I came across, and I was very curious about it. And it turns out that there's actually quite a lot of literature out there. There's several really good people online who talk about it and teach it. And then, of course, there's the Monroe Institute in Virginia, where that is one of their many primary focuses. And so I thought, well, if nothing else, I'm an okay student. I can learn. And I began researching and reading and doing exercises that are supposed to get you there. And I had a number of experiences. I was not one of those quick people that learned it overnight, though. It took me time. I would say I worked on it for a really good 6 to 9 months before I started to have really meaningful experiences. And it almost always started out with this vibrational state experience that's so often described, where you feel like your whole body is just vibrating at this really heavy, strong rate. And of course, it's not an actual physical, like you wouldn't see if you looked at somebody going through this experience, you wouldn't see them moving. It's a very internalized vibration that's experienced. And so I struggled to get past that point for a little while because it always freaked me out. It's a really visceral, strong, and it feels physical, even though, like I said, you wouldn't notice anybody actually experiencing by looking at them from the outside. But eventually I did get past that vibrational state and would find myself, actually, the very first thing that I experienced was looking at my astral hand. Because one of the things that you're suggested to do is to try to lift your hand and look at it. And I must have still been kind of on the edge of fully into it, but still conscious. And maybe we'll talk about that later, kind of this double state that you can get into. But I was finally able, with some effort, to pick up my astral hand and look at it. And it was like the shape of my hand, but it was like looking into a galaxy of stars. It was just full of pinpoints of light. And then I would have thought that I was mentally saying, that's weird. But apparently I said it out loud because my husband, who was laying next to me, rolled over and said, what? And then I was out of it, then I was fully out of it. And I just said, I'll talk to you about it in the morning. So that really probably was my very first experience.
And that's kind of cool because it's something you studied and wanted to experience and were able to make it happen. Now, I think, Gary, with you, it was sort of different. You sort of spontaneously had an out of body experience.
Well, I did. Actually, if I go back to my youth, I mean, 4, 5, 6 years old, I had flying dreams with my guides. And the reason I know they were out of body experiences is because I remember them to this day. I can't tell you what I dreamed 2 nights ago unless I really focus and write it down or record it or something. But out of body experiences never leave me. So fast forward to adulthood, late 20s, and I think I told this story last week, is I was at that point already a researcher into afterlife, spirituality. Um, so I had a girlfriend, and I said, let's try and have a astral experience, an out of body experience. I don't think they called it OBE in those days. And I said, we'll give ourselves suggestion when we go to bed. She went to her house, I went to my house, and we'll meet up. And we did. And I remember telling her there was a little opening in the forest with a knoll that was about 3 steps up. And I stood there with her and I said, okay, remember the surroundings. So the next morning she came over and she said, okay, what were the surroundings? Key question right there. And I started to describe it and I watched her face drop. She was speechless because she had experienced the exact same thing, which was very confirming for me. So a
Now,
shared out of body experience.
yeah. So my question is that you experienced them as a child.
Mhm.
Was there a period where you sort of went off the path and didn't do those for a while and sort of got, caught up in third dimension, so to speak, and then did that exploration start again with the 20s? Is that when it started again?
Correct. Yeah, I was still reading about various spiritual aspects,
Mhm.
and gaining knowledge, at least as far as we can on the physical plane. So yeah, it did kick into gear. I That was the only time I induced an out of body experience. The rest of them have all been spontaneous. And I have some fun ones. They're just, I mean, to me, they're just fun. And um, I never forget them. I remember them in great detail. Um, so an example is one night I found myself out of body and it was like, oh, I'm out of body. Now, when I'm out of body, if I'm fully conscious, and I want to state, we all go out of body every night, but do we go out consciously? And we don't always take our full consciousness with us, so we often won't retain the memory of the experiences that we have. On some level, we do. Um, so I found myself out of body. Now, when I'm in a full out of body state, I could tell you my social security number, So that's a good sign that you're solidly conscious. Your consciousness is fully with your astral aspect. Um, so I find myself out of body and I'm thinking, oh, great, I'm out of body. And I'm always really joyful when I get out of body. It's exhilarating. And I thought, gee, I wonder what architecture in Cairo looks like. Boom, I'm in Cairo and I'm on a street and it's dawn. And there are a few people walking around. Of course, they don't notice me. And I'm looking at the architecture and I'm thinking, yeah, it's different, it's interesting. And I kind of raise up and I see the pyramids in the background. And I thought, well, that can't be. The pyramids are out in the middle of the desert. So I come out of it and I thought, well, maybe I'm mistaken. Till about a month or two later, I think it was a National Geographic that had a picture of Cairo, almost the exact same scene with the pyramids in the background. I did not realize they were that close to Cairo. So then I started doing the time check because I thought, okay, it was dawn on the streets of Cairo. And I had this experience about, I think it was like 1 in the morning, midnight or 1. And the time worked out, and that would be dawn in Cairo. So I thought, oh, that's confirmation. So you can do anything when you're out of body. You can be anywhere, but I want to warn people, be very clear about what your motives are for wanting to have an out of body experience. Um, are they pure motives? Is it to gain knowledge? If it's for any ego purpose, don't even try it. Don't go there for that, you know. If you're really focused on, growing spiritually and you want to learn, that's a good motive for pursuing it.
Very good, very good. Yeah, my brain is going in a whole bunch of different directions, and Sally, I think yours is too, because I'm thinking, well, we should really fold in lucid dreaming and that kind of thing. But I will tell you now, we did share some, out of body experiences in our last episode, so I won't go into those. But I will share one that I didn't share. We were living in Virginia Beach near the Edgar Cayce Foundation, and that's where I discovered the Bruce. Is it Bruce Monroe? Is it Bruce or
Robert
Monroe?
Oh, Robert Monroe.
They have like this incredible metaphysical library there. And so I was just a newbie waking up, and I mean, I was like a little sponge reading all these books, what I could find on. And so I started reading Robert Monroe, all of his books, and that's what got me interested in it. So it wasn't like a spontaneous thing for me, like you, Sally. You stumble upon the subject and then you start reading about it. So that's where I started sort of getting interested in it. But I had an out of body experience when we lived in Florida, but now we lived in Virginia Beach. But so I was practicing. It was early one morning. Milt was up and he was cooking breakfast in the kitchen. And I was able to get out of my body. And I go into the kitchen and he's cooking away and singing, in the kitchen. But I turned around and there was this older gentleman sailor, leaning up against the refrigerator smoking a cigarette. And I thought, And I basically said, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I like to cook. And I totally understood that he had been a cook on one of the Navy ships. And of course, we were near a naval port in Virginia Beach. And he was just watching Milt cook and sitting there smoking a cigarette. And then I popped back into my body and I got up. I said, Milt, guess what just happened? And I told him about this gentleman and that he was watching me. He says, that's really funny. I smelled cigarette smoke for about 10 minutes here in the kitchen. And he didn't, neither of us a smoke or anything. So that was like such a validating experience to run into this spirit being smoking cigarettes, And again, I think out of body experiences can be such a afterlife affirming experience,
Yes.
People have NDEs and then they have proof there's a life after death, but learning that you are consciousness and not your body, I think, is one of the reasons to explore out of body experiences. So your thoughts on that, Sally? What do you think about?
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's learnable, but I will, talking about what Gary was saying earlier about his flying dreams as a kid, I had those a lot as well. Mm-hmm. And I think they're very common for most, especially children. But I had them well into my even young adult years. They've largely subsided now. But yeah, these things are learnable. And you're right, there's a lot of crossover with out-of-body experiences, with things like lucid dreams, with a state we get into often called the hypnagogic and the hypnopompic states, which are kind of just before you fall asleep fully and just as before you're fully awake, both at night and in the morning and in cycles throughout the night. And those are sweet spots. They're jumping off points. And so just beginning to explore what consciousness is really capable of does give you that conviction that you're not your body. I get a lot of mediumistic information in the hypnagogic, hypnopompic states. I find myself in conversation with people, and it usually means I'm going to meet their loved ones in a day or two, typically. So all of these things are connected, and they're learnable skills. They're not, you know, withheld to just special individuals, because we all are consciousness at our core.
Right. We're not our bodies. Go ahead,
We are
Gary.
not our bodies.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to add lucid dreaming, and just in case anybody doesn't know what that is, that's where you're aware that you're dreaming. You're awake in the dream, but it's still a dream. But you are the author of what's happening. And I remember having lucid dreams also as a kid. I remember being bullied by somebody, and I told them, I said, I can disappear. And so just stop bullying me because I can disappear. And he's like, yeah, sure you can. And I went, watch. I went, dink. And I woke up. So that's a lucid dream. But a lucid dream is a good stepping off point for a full out of body experience. And as Sally was saying, one of the ways to transition from a lucid dream to an out of body, a full out of body state is to focus on your hands. That's one way, or the soil, the ground that you're standing on in the dream. Just really focus in on it. And that brings you to a point where you reach the full out of body state. Then you're no longer creating the circumstances in the degree that you are in a lucid dream, but you're now, free of that. But it's a good stepping off point and I think almost everybody's had at least one lucid dream in their life that they can remember. Um, so I just wanted to add that. And then some people may not know what a lucid dream is, so we want to put that out there for them.
Right. And I think there are books out there. One of my favorite out of body books is Out of Body Adventures by Rick Stack. I don't know if you've read that one. That's one I keep sort of on my bedside and that kind of thing. I haven't focused as much on out of body experiences recently because life just sometimes gets us so busy, but I think it's really an important part of exploration on your spiritual journey because it really proves to you that you are not your body. And
Yes.
you don't have to have a near-death experience to prove it. You can do this without some traumatic event. But I agree that it should be done for spiritual reasons,
Right.
for exploration and knowledge of who are we and exploring our consciousness, because that's what we are as consciousness. So I think that's a good part. What are your favorite books that you have read about out of body experiences?
I would really recommend to everyone William Buhlman. He has several good books, and he's a teacher of the out of body experience. That's Buhlman is how you spell his last name. Also, and there are some good videos by him on YouTube, so you can put his name in the search bar and come up with some of his talks. Also, Louis Monero. Louis is with the IAC, which is the International Academy of Consciousness, I believe. And his videos are very good as well. And Lewis is spelled Luis, and it's Minero. He tells a great story of one of the first times he had an out-of-body experience. He decided to do an experiment, and he went down to the street in his out-of-body state and looked at cars and license plates parked on the street. Then went back to his body, wandered out in his pajamas, and verified that he had seen the license plates and the type and color of car. Um, so it's very exciting. And yes, it's you don't need to have a near-death experience. And in fact, as my friend Kim Clark Sharp says, You know, that you don't want to have a near-death experience. Dying is not necessarily fun, the actual physical part of that. Being dead's great, they say, but dying, not so much fun. Um, so there are other ways to explore because she said people come to me all the time, oh, I wish I'd have a near-death experience. And she's like, no, you don't. You don't want to do that. So it's a great way to explore, as you said, Susan, your spirituality and the fact that you are consciousness and consciousness is primary.
Right, right.
Then it kind of leads us into the fact that because consciousness is primary, how much of our reality, our personal and collective reality, are we creating with consciousness?
And that's a really good point. Is we are creators. I think it's a little bit slow here, slower than it would be in when you're in an out of body state. I know for me, when I thought turn around, I was immediately, it was just like a millisecond, I was facing the other direction. So it's a lot slower in third dimension or in these physical bodies, but we are creators of our own realities. And of course, I think when we're out of our body, we're not carrying the heaviness of ego, which I think slows everything down. We're just pure consciousness and
Yep.
exploring the moment. And that's a good thing to ask about what you guys think about, when you're out of the body, you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the experience. You're in the now, which makes me think that people who have passed over, they're in the now. They're not thinking past, present, future. They're just experiencing. And I think that's one part of the spiritual journey of learning how to live in the now, and being with the now. And our brains are so in the future or the past or what's going to happen if this and that kind of thing. So it's also a good teacher in that way, I would think.
And what you said is very true because when I went to Cairo, it was instantaneous. I was there. All I did was pose the thought, gee, I wonder what architecture looks like in Cairo. And boom, I was there that fast. And out of body, I mean, near death experiencers describe that same phenomena when they haven't necessarily left the Earth plane yet. I'm thinking of George Ritchie and his near death experience, where he found himself going to different places on the Earth plane, and nobody could see or hear him. Uh, but it was instantaneous for him also. So that's a good book to read as well. So Louis Monero, William Buhlman, they're two of the very best, I think, for learning about it. So
Great. Any thoughts there, Sally? Your favorite book? Did we ask you that
You
yet?
know, that's a good question. I've got probably over a dozen books on out of body experiences, and I agree with those. Anything by Robert Monroe is really good. Tom Campbell is interesting. His take on what he's experiencing is a little different than mine, but still, he's got some really, interesting experiences to share as well as ideas about it. A really big book by a man from Australia by the name of Robert Bruce,
That's
and
why I got the Bruce.
called Astral Dynamics. Yes. Yeah, it's a big, thick, heavy book. And that's probably the book that actually got me out of body, in that he gives a lot of exercises that you can do. That said, he also, I don't agree with everything he says in that, but maybe it's important to talk about. He sometimes dwells a little more than I would prefer on what I would call maybe the lower realms, the darker realms. And those exist. I'm fully confident that those areas do exist, and they can be a little bit of a maybe even frightening experience for some people if they end up there and don't expect to, be experiencing that sort of thing. But there's ways to remove yourself from those locations as well and to deal with kind of anything that might be frightening for you. And so it's important to maybe know that. But there's also something to be said about the fact that you often are in, when you have these experiences, another body, right? An astral body, or, other types of bodies that, are very real where you are, but different from the physical body. And then there are completely disembodied experiences that can be had. So, I mean, there's so much that we could never really talk about all of it in the course of a visit like this. But one really good person that talks about his wide range of experiences is a man by the name of Jürgen Ziva. And he's even got a really beautiful illustrated book out right now of some of the experiences and places and locales that he has visited. So if you want to have a little bit of an idea of what those possibilities are, he's an artist by background as well, and he has depicted a lot of these things.
And he had 50 years that he had recorded his out-of-body experience. And he had all these books, these notebooks, and his daughter said, why don't you publish this? So he did, and that's how his story got out. I would also mention Bruce Moen, who studied under Monroe. He's now transitioned to the other side, but his books are also good. Moen is how you spell his last name. But I would say do your homework if you want to explore these realms. And just a thought, the guy who dwelled sort of on the lower, it's probably easier to get to the lower planes than it is the higher planes for us here, because we're so slowed down. It's such a denser environment. I've never experienced higher planes in an out-of-body state. And I just think that's because we're not vibrationally so attuned. Now, Jürgen Ziva did this for so many years that he found himself going into higher and higher and higher states. So,
so working on yourself is kind of important.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's very, very important. Yeah. And I think also, I think while we're here, we attract the experiences that can best help us grow. The same thing would be true of going out of the body. And if we experience lower vibrating energies, there's a lesson there for us. There's an opportunity for growth. So it's not something to be afraid of, but more an adventure. And if we can look at out-of-body experience as an adventure of, exploring different realms, and you're out of your body, so you can't really be harmed,
right.
Those kind of things. You're just there looking. You're being a looky-loo into, So there's a couple of things I want to sort of talk about. And we could talk about the fear of getting out of your body and ways to get past that. But I also want to talk about time travel in the out-of-body state. I had one experience when we lived in the Sedona area. I had this wonderful healer that I went to all the time called David Milgram. And we got to be really good friends. He a chiropractor / healer. He's one of the medicine men for the Hopi. And so we got to be really good friends. And I had a dream one time, and I was back in Philadelphia, like around the Ben Franklin time. And there was David, not in the current body, but he was standing on a podium talking to crowds about politics. And I walked on the stage with him. He goes, "It's so good to see you again." And we hugged, and I went on, And so I told David about the dream. He says, "Yeah, I know. I was so-and-so during that time, during that period, And so that out-of-body experience of encountering David in the past, I think there can be past or time travel, so to speak, in your body through the out-of-body experience. So have you guys ever experienced something like that?
Edit point there.
Yeah, I lost my my screen for a second. Sorry. I have not personally experienced it, but I have an experience within my family that I think might relate to what you're talking about. And it's centered around the fact that as we approach death, we become quite loose in our bodies and start to see other realms and other things. And my grandmother, as she was transitioning, she began to see the town that she grew up in as it looked when she was a child. And so she was seeing the horse and buggies. She was seeing people that she knew that, who were long gone, who were young adults again. She began seeing her past for all practical purposes. And that in itself, I think, is an out of body experience, even though she wasn't, she hadn't fully transitioned yet. She was beginning to have those visuals that so many people have as they transition. And so that's the only experience that I have that I can speak of directly, but I know that they do occur.
And we actually interviewed on Soul Explorers a woman who found herself transitioned in time to a different era. So that's, certainly possible. And you said something, Susan, that I want to elaborate on a little bit, and that is the common thing I hear from people when I talk excitedly about out-of-body experiences is, oh, I'm afraid to have one of those. I'm afraid I wouldn't come back. You're perfectly safe. You are connected by the silver cord, and guess what? Nobody's getting out of here before it's their time to get out of here. I kind of ascribe to the idea that the end of this life is preset, not the how, but the when. So we have chosen a timeline that we're going to be here, and we're going to leave at that timeline. And it could be tomorrow, it could be 20, 30, 40 years. Um, so you're perfectly safe in the out-of-body experience. And besides, you're really that spirit. You're not the body that it inhabits or utilizes as its avatar here on the earth plane. So I think it's really important for people to not approach it with fear. First of all, if you approach it with fear, you won't get out of body. You,
Right.
and
That's true.
the
I
fear
can
will
I can
bring you,
attest to that.
the fear will bring you back.
Yeah.
And another thing is, if you do succeed in getting out of body, don't focus on the body lying there on the bed. You might glance at it, but if you focus on it, you're going back in. That happens. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to make that point because I feel bad when people are fearful, and partly that's Hollywood's doing. Hollywood has made everything fearful. You have a mystical experience, and there's got to be a negative, dark side to it, and that's not always, that's not the case with out-of-body experiences.
Right, right.
Sometimes it's just the unknown. Like I said for me, the reason I can say I attest to that is because I would experience a vibrational state and it was kind of shocking, you know? And I had to experience it enough times that it was no longer surprising to me and I was excited to experience it. Um, and that's the key. You've got to find that balance between fear and excitement. It actually needs to be somewhere in between because too much excitement can also keep you from experiencing. But once it becomes something that you've experienced over and over again, and you're fine every time, you realize that it's okay and you can continue to move forward.
Right.
And so, Susan, I wanted you to answer the same question. Did you have any concern or fear around your first experiences, or was it something you just kind of knew you were fine to begin with?
I was excited when I first started feeling the vibrations. I mean, I know I have out of body experience, but I usually find myself waking up in the midst of it, not the getting out of the body state. But I did, when I first started exploring, I have those vibrational states. And I was really excited I got out, but I was afraid to leave the bedroom for some reason. There was a fear of leaving where I felt safe. You know what I mean? Like, what's out in the living room? Is there a man leaning against the refrigerator smoking a cigarette? And I think I got past that. I know for a lot of times, because I still have a lot of flying dreams, and I'm always afraid of the power lines for some reason. It's like, I don't want to be flying where there's power lines, or I'm zooming under them or zooming around them. There's something weird about those power lines that I'm afraid. And I can understand that, because I think perhaps our consciousness has a little bit of energy in it and electric. I don't know why, I'm afraid of that. But yeah, I mean, this whole discussion makes me excited. I really should get back into this and see what I can figure out instead of being afraid, because if we can travel in time, if we can travel to visit our loved ones in the spirit realm, which I have done with my grandmother, how cool would that be, to go visit people who have passed over just to make sure they're okay, not to cling to them, not to, but to just check up on them and go for a little visit. Has anybody in the books that you guys have read done that, or have you done that kind of thing where you went to the spirit realm and connected with your loved one just to make sure they're okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Gary.
Sally.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Just last night, I had the experience with my dog Bear that died in the fire. Um, and so I had and I had another one with him recently where my cat and my dog were wrestling. And I'm telling Bear, you're going to injure the cat. But then the cat jumps up and chases the dog and wrestles the dog to the ground. And then I realized, oh, I'm out of body. They can't hurt each other. They're playing, because he grew up around the cat. So, they're family to each other. But the initial was to have that earthly thought, oh, you're going to injure the kitty. But then the kitty jumps up and chases the dog and wrestles the dog to the ground. And so perfectly safe. So, but yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there where I was trying to go with it. But well,
Visiting ones who have passed over, visiting.
visiting ones. Yeah, I have had them come to me, certainly to give messages, and yeah. So that's a very common way, dream visitations. Sally can tell you more about that. She actually just gave a class on it. So
Yeah, like I said, they're all connected. Lucid dreaming and astral travel are kind of two sides of the same coin, from my perspective. And they've even found just recently, so something I shared in the class, just in the last few weeks, they've discovered that lucid dreaming is an entirely different state of consciousness than normal dreaming. That you have gamma brain waves that kind of go off the charts during a lucid dream. And I suspect that's pretty similar to the same brain states that occur for even straight conscious astral projection. That's what I was really working at, was never falling asleep and astral projecting. And so those were the most convincing experiences I had, where I stayed into a deep meditative state. My body became relaxed enough that, the body, if it stays still enough, long enough, the body will think it's asleep, but you can remain consciously aware. And so when you go from this conscious aware state to the vibrational state to out of body, and you never drop consciousness in between, as you do often with dreams or lucid dreams, then it's that continuity that becomes also part of the convincing aspect of it. But yeah, I've had quite a few lucid dream visitations, and you can learn to initiate them. It doesn't mean that they're going to happen every time. I do think those kind of lucid dream visits are, they're not rare per se. I mean, anybody can have them, but they don't happen, weekly necessarily, and I think that's because it takes energy both on our part as well as their part. They've got to come down in vibration while we try to bring ourselves up and then achieve the states that are required for that interaction to happen. So
something I would add too, if you're going to explore through out-of-body experience, ask your team, your guides, to assist you. They're always waiting for us to ask for their assistance, but they'll kind of leave us alone if we don't ask. So, because it's much better to have a guide. I mean, there is a school of thought that says you should never do it without a guide working with you. So never try it on your own. That's just one school of thought. Plenty of people have. I have a funny vibrational state story. I was taking a nap on my couch one day. At the time, I was living on 160 acres in the Sierra Mountains, and the vibrational state started. And I thought, oh, what's that? It's just the train going by. And then I came wide awake and went, wait a minute, I don't have a train. So, but it felt like a train roaring by, it can take different forms. So I just wanted to throw that in. But yeah, ask for assistance from your guides. Say, if it's for my highest good, will my guides assist me in having an out-of-body experience? I think that's a good way to put it.
Oh, that's very cool. So Sally, while you were talking, I had this wild idea. I think, since we have this portal vortex, whatever it is that opened up here at the casa, I think I want to put a dream tent in that space. I mean, the energy of that space probably goes out about 300 feet or more, where you hit this wall of energy once you come into it. And I think maybe a dream tent that would be specifically for dreaming, putting it out there. One of the things we do in our retreats is a dream helper ceremony, where we pick somebody to dream for, and the group dreams specifically for that person. And, they write out what their problem is and what they're worried about. We don't know. And we dream, and we bring our dreams back together the next day and share them. And we figure out what their problem is and what the solution is through the dream state. And a lot of times that person will show up in the dreamer's dreams. So, I think there's such a connected consciousness there. You often see it as a hand, we're all our individuals here, but down here is this pool of connected consciousness that the intent creates the experience. And you're right, if it's for our highest good, I think that there's some amazing experience. So I think I'm going to put a dream tent out there.
That's a great idea.
Field. Yeah. And see if that energy doesn't assist, I've got a lot of stuff I got to do now. Assist in those soul explorers, that want to explore consciousness, to see if that energy doesn't assist in that in some way. So anyway, so I want to take the subject back to a little bit of orbs, because I think there's a connection with orbs and out-of-body experiences, because oftentimes, and I'll have to share this with you if you're interested. A long time ago, Spirit gave me a television show called Guides, and it's the afterlife adventure of 4 deceased souls who come back to help the living. But in the series, they show up as orbs. That's how they travel, as orbs. But then they have their spirit body, and that they can manifest that as well. So I think there's this spirit body, but I also think there's people that talk about, when they're out of their body, they see 360 degrees around, and there's this orb thing. So what are your thoughts about orbs? I know that my first experience with an orb was way back when I first woke up, and Milt and I happened to be talking about his wife, Mary Jane, who had passed over. And I saw this pink orb fly into the room. and just sort of touch me, almost like kiss me on the neck and move on. And I knew that was Mary Jane. And it was such a fun experience because we were here talking about her. And she was like giving her approval of our relationship or whatever. But she came in as this pink orb. And then there's this really good picture I have of friends where the wife is 7 months pregnant, and sitting right in front of her belly is this beautiful little blue orb, which I felt was the soul of that child waiting to fully embed into the body, but it was still outside the body, and she was 7 months pregnant. So let's talk a little bit about orbs, because those are out-of-body beings. Any thoughts?
Yes, and I'm going to let Sally tell most of this, but I have a lot of experience with orbs. And in fact, they were showing up on Zooms quite a bit. Right now, I'm in a place that I have a white background, so they're not as visible. You don't really see them here. But when I had my house, it was a darker background, and so you could see the white orbs going by. But they only came at specific times. I question whether those are actually the spirit or created by the spirit people. That it may be something, just as they can direct a dragonfly or a cardinal, that as a sign for you, they can direct orbs. I don't know. I mean, that's not a definitive knowledge, but I suspect they may be created by the spirit people. So I'll let Sally tell a little bit about when my orbs would show up, and also her experiences with orbs.
Sure. And I'm kind of with Gary in that I don't have an absolute hard bit of evidence that I can say I know what this is exactly. But with Gary, when they would show up frequently, all the time, really, it would generally be when he would suddenly say something either about a family member who was on the other side, and boom, an orb would pop out from behind him. Or when he was saying something particularly profound, like we were supposed to pay attention to what had just come out of his mouth, and an orb or two would start popping off. And so it, to the point that it showed clear intelligence. And that's the thing that's important. So whether or not it is the energy of a disembodied soul itself or something that's directed, I can't say yet at this point in time. I will say, and this is not something that I've experienced, but it's something I've heard repeated by different people at multiple times, that when they have had a healing experience, they have had the visual. It's generally been at night. So whether it was dream state for them or an out-of-body state, I'm not sure. But I've heard several people describe essentially the same thing, that they were able to visualize orbs going into their body and then coming out again. And then in that process, a healing had occurred. So it's an energy of some sort, whether it's the conscious energy of an individual or if it's directed energy. I think that discussion could be had.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. I know that for me, sometimes when I've captured orbs, I'll blow them up and I can see faces in them.
Yes, we have discovered that as well.
Yeah. I often find my spirit animal, which is a female deer, in the middle of my orb. So I don't know. It could be directed. It could not. I don't know. And it's the same thing with animals. The dragonfly you were sharing earlier that was right in the face where they sent, sometimes, well, that's my son. We don't know. I do know for me, and having that experience with my mom, and I don't know if I shared this story, but my brother called me and said, "Oh, Mom's got weeks to live." And that very next day at work, I had the windows open, and this magpie comes and sits underneath. It comes underneath the little veranda, sits on the window and squawks at me. I got within a foot of this thing. It didn't fly away, just squawk, 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 until I go, "Oh, she's got days to live. It's not weeks." And I knew that bird was sent to get my attention to say, no, this isn't going to happen in weeks. This is going to happen in days. And sure enough, within 4 days, she passed. And so that's another fascinating topic to think, how does spirit direct those animals or those orbs or whatever? Go ahead, Gary.
Well, Suzanne Wilson told me that they actually can take classes on the other side to learn how to direct insects, animals, to give you a sign. It takes a little bit of work. You don't just aren't naturally imbued with that ability necessarily. You have to learn how to do it like anything. Um, but I would say I had an orb experience which tends to lean me towards the belief that they create them, they're made of energy, and they direct them. And that experience is, I was one night, my Afterlife book club was about to start, and my co-host and I were on. Nobody else was on yet, and I was having like a light show going on around me, and an orb finally came and hovered right here over my shoulder, and we're looking at it thinking, well, that's unusual. And then it grew brighter and brighter. And do you remember the old Disney intro where Tinkerbell would, you know, tap her wand and the sparks would go? Well, this orb grew brighter until it burst into sparks and vanished. So that tends to make me think it's an energy play. Um, well, of course it is either way, but not necessarily the spirit itself, but the spirit directed it to do that, to put on a
Interesting.
light show.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
interesting.
a theory.
It's a theory. Yeah, that's cool. So I guess something more to explore. Interesting enough, I'm going back to this. Um, I channeled this TV pilot called, and so um, Nick dies and he ends up in spirit guide school. And he's in this school to learn how to be a spirit guide. And, so you're right. They do have school. They can go to school in the spirit world to say, just like we go down here, like us being soul explorers, exploring our soul, our consciousness, and our excitement. I think that excitement travels with us in the other side. Oh, let's see what it's like to explore the soul from this side, and experience it from this side. So I can totally see that. And I get really excited about this whole idea of exploring our consciousness, because wow, we're not stuck in this dense third dimensional body, and we can travel. So we can experience wonderful things in the spirit world. Go ahead, Sally. You had.
Yeah, well, because you bring up a really important tangent. For me, one of the things that I frequently ask for from my guides as I'm going to bed, and I have experienced in a lucid state, is to please help lead me to the halls of learning. We can go to those spiritual schools even while we're embodied. So, and I have had experiences of basically becoming lucid in these kind of environments. Once just in front of I call it an angelic instructor, but also actually seeing this almost like college type or coliseum type environment that I became aware of being in, and recognizing the instruction that was occurring at the time. And so that's one more real fun reason to practice astral projection, because it's one of the places you absolutely can visit.
And you can grow and learn spiritually. Go ahead, Gary.
Yes.
Yeah, this ties into something I wanted to add. Susan, as a working medium, don't you find some spirits are better communicators than others? So don't they have to learn how to step their energy down, how to give symbols that are going to make sense, how to find a medium that they resonate with on a vibrational level so they can get their information across? So there's got to be some training, just like we go to learn something here. They go to learn on their side, I believe.
Yeah.
That
And that's something we can discuss down the road. We'll put a pin in that one too. But I work best with those spirits that have already moved into the light
Mhm.
rather than any that are still down here, haven't left the earth plane, or still working out their stuff. And in those situations, I go to their guides to get information about them. But stepping into their energy is really hard for me, those that are not awake. And I don't know if you feel that as well, Sally. And so I don't do very many readings for people that I always say, no, we're going to wait a month before we talk to anybody that's passed over, just passed over, because they're still hanging around. They want to go to the funeral, they want to go to the, that kind of thing. But I would agree with that. You've got to match that vibration, of that. So that's a good subject somewhere down the road of.
I have an example of that too. Right after my mother passed, I think I had a friend in LA who was a medium and very good one. And she brought my mother through. She could never figure out who it was, but and the information was correct, but it felt mechanical. And this was only a short time after her passing, maybe 3, 4 months. Felt mechanical. And it was like, yeah, I mean, the information is correct. She knew I had gone to Florida to see my mother and then had to return a month later for the funeral. I mean, everything was accurate, but I didn't have that sense of my mother. Fast forward a year or so, and my mother comes through in a reading. Well, she evidently went to school because she is a powerhouse in readings. She comes through very strongly, and she knows how to communicate. And the
Your mom
description
has
of her,
skills.
what's that?
I said, your mom has skills.
She does.
She really
She does.
does.
So and partly because we discussed these matters when she was alive. And so she had a fascination with it. And so she knows that I want to get that clarity from her now that she's there, Um, and she's gotten really good at it. Just really, really good at communicating. Every medium that has read me would say, yeah, your mother is just a great communicator now. So, yeah.
All right, well, we're nearing the end of our time. I thought it would be fun next time to talk about mystical experiences with higher evolved beings. Are you guys open to that? Things
Sure.
have really impacted our lives, those experiences that have impacted our lives on a spiritual level, and those higher evolved beings, whether it be God, Jesus, Buddha, whoever. I think it would be fun to explore that, because I think we want to open people up to the idea that everybody can have those experiences as well. So, any
Great topic.
last parting words, Sally, Gary, that you want to share about out of body experiences before we close this up?
I would just say that if you're curious to have an out of body experience, find yourself some good resources, good instructors. Know that it's not something that's necessarily going to happen overnight, although for some people it does. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a few people that do it very quickly, but to go into it with as best you can, with no fear, with no concern that you won't get back in your body, but just with a willingness to be open about the experience and to explore. It is a very learnable skill, just like all of these other subtle experiences that we can have while we're embodied.
Perfect. Gary?
And something you said, a lot of people don't leave the confines of the room that their body is in because of fear. And there's just a multitude of things you can explore. And don't worry about distance from your body. If you need to be back in your body, believe me, you'll be brought right back. It's instantaneous. Um, and I would say, if you want to pursue this, explore within yourself. What are your motives? Are your motives for spiritual development or for some sort of an ego feed to say, hey, I did this? So your motives need to be good, pure, and come from the heart. So that's my biggest caveat I would add to it is just know what your intentions are. And intention plays such a role in having an out-of-body experience as well as many other things. So make your intention that I want to have this experience. Call on your guides to assist you. So
Perfect. That's a great way to end it. So join us next time where we're going to talk about the mystical experience. And it's been a fun discussion. And thank you both. And we'll carry on next month. So bye,
Till
everybody.
next time.